Captain Elias Ward had faced pirates, mercenaries, and the occasional black hole storm, but nothing prepared him for the cold, echoing throne room of the Jala Dominion. He was marched in under heavy guard, wrists bound with humming energy cuffs. The floor beneath him was a polished obsidian that reflected the towering figure seated upon a throne of pale metal and living vines, Queen Vareth, sovereign of the Jala. She was a vision both beautiful and terrifying. Her height, easily over 7 feet, was matched only by the command in her posture. Her skin gleamed like molten silver under the high lamps, and her golden, slit-pupiled eyes locked on him like a predator deciding whether to eat or ignore its prey. A crown of blackened crystal curled upward from her head like frozen lightning. Elias stopped 2 paces from the base of her dais. The guards shoved him forward, but he caught his balance without looking away from her. "A human," she said at last, her voice deep and layered, as though another tone echoed faintly beneath her words. "One of the fragile ones." The court erupted in quiet laughter. Jala nobles with jeweled skin and elaborate robes leaning toward each other to whisper. Elias had been warned that among the Jala, humans were regarded as physically weak, emotionally erratic, and only useful for menial labor. Queen Vareth's lips curved into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Some of my generals," she continued, "whisper absurdities, that humans are adaptable enough to mix blood with stronger races." She looked him over slowly, her gaze sharp as a blade. "A foolish thought. The idea of breeding with such a creature is laughable." The court roared with laughter this time. Elias felt the heat of humiliation rise, but he forced his face to remain calm. His heartbeat was steady, his eyes never leaving hers. When the noise quieted, he said evenly, "If it's such a joke, Your Majesty, why bother bringing me here instead of discarding me in the void?" The ripple of murmurs that followed was different now. Surprise, even disapproval. Jala prisoners did not speak to their queen without permission. Vareth tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle. "Because," she said at last, "your tiny ship carried something my scientists cannot decipher, and I am curious if your mind matches your mouth." Her tone suggested amusement, but there was a flicker in her gaze that Elias couldn't place. She gestured to her guards. "Take him to the lower chambers. Keep him alive. If he proves useless, space is hungry." As they led him away, Elias glanced back once. The queen was still watching him, her smirk unchanged, but her golden eyes followed him until the great doors closed. In that moment, Elias didn't know it, but the seed of something unexpected had been planted, not in his heart, but in hers. The lower chambers of the Jala royal fortress were nothing like the glittering throne room. Here, the walls were rough, veined with faintly glowing minerals, and the air smelled faintly of ozone. Elias's cell was small, but not cruel. There was a low bed, a basin for water, and even a small desk. It wasn't generosity, it was observation. He could feel the eyes of unseen watchers in the walls. Every day, a pair of silent guards escorted him to a laboratory filled with alien instruments that seemed to hum in tones he could feel in his bones. Here, Jala scientists pushed fragments of his ship's black box toward him and gestured for him to make sense of it. The first day, he refused. The second day, he began translating. Not for them, but for himself. He wanted to understand what they'd taken from him.
By the fourth day, she appeared again. Queen Vareth didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply entered the lab, her presence filling the space like a storm front. The scientists bowed and retreated without a word. "You work," she observed, circling him slowly. "Not out of loyalty, not out of fear." Elias kept his attention on the half-disassembled data core. "Curiosity's a habit I haven't managed to break." Her eyes narrowed, and something in her expression shifted. Subtle, but there. "Curiosity," she repeated, as if tasting the word. "It is a dangerous habit among my kind." They spoke more that day than they had in the throne room. She questioned him about the ship's systems, about human spacefaring history. He answered selectively, sometimes dodging a question entirely. Instead of punishing him, she seemed entertained. Days blurred into a strange routine. She visited the lab often, sometimes to question, sometimes just to watch. Elias noticed small things: the way she dismissed her attendance when she spoke to him, the faint crease in her brow when she listened, the fact that she never sat when he was working, as though standing made her less vulnerable. One afternoon, he caught her watching, not him, but the way he spoke to a young Jala technician. The boy was nervous, fumbling with the data crystal, and Elias had placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, speaking calmly until the boy's hand stopped shaking. When Elias looked up, Vareth's expression was unreadable. "You waste time on the weak," she said. I shrugged. "Where I come from, that's not wasting time." Something flickered in her golden eyes again. Annoyance, perhaps, or the first crack in a long-held belief. The arguments began soon after. They disagreed about everything: strategy, history, even what counted as strength. Yet beneath the sharp words, there was an odd rhythm, like two duelists who secretly enjoyed the match. By the time a week had passed, Elias realized something unsettling. The Queen wasn't just studying him anymore. She was learning from him. And in ways neither of them would admit, they were beginning to close the distance between their worlds.
The seventh morning of his captivity began with alarms. Deep, resonant tones boomed through the fortress corridors, rattling the mineral veins in the walls. Elias was in the lab when the sound started. Two guards rushed in, barking orders in Jala, their silver crests bristling with fear. Queen Vareth entered moments later, her usual calm replaced with a tension that sharpened every line of her face. "There is sickness in the court," she said without preamble. "It spreads quickly. My healers cannot contain it." Even through the alien language's translation device, Elias caught the edge in her voice. Fear. Not for herself, he thought, but for her people. He almost asked why she was telling him this, but then he saw it. One of her attendants, a young woman with scaled skin dulled to gray, swaying on her feet. The glassy sheen in her eyes made something click in his mind. It was a look he'd seen before, on a deep space mining outpost where a bacterial fever had almost wiped out an entire crew. "What are the symptoms?" he asked quickly. "Fever, weakness, breathing difficulty. Death follows in 3 days, Vareth said. Elias's pulse quickened. "You've tried antibiotics?" "Our medicine does not work. This thing ignores it." "That's because it's not from your world," Elias said. "I think I've seen something like this before."
Within an hour, he was given access to the royal infirmary. The room was a soft glow of blue light, rows of beds filled with Jala nobles and servants alike. Elias moved between them, scanning faces, listening to strained breaths. He worked without stopping, sketching formulas, explaining to bewildered Jala medics how a certain class of ancient human antibiotics could be replicated using compounds they already had. Queen Vareth watched from the edge of the room, silent but focused. He noticed her once, standing over a dying child, her hand resting lightly on the girl's scaled forehead. The gesture was almost tender. It took nearly 30 hours, but when the first treated patient's fever broke, the shift in the room was immediate. The whispers of despair turned into murmurs of hope. When Queen Vareth approached him, there was no smirk, no mockery. She simply said, "You have done what my greatest healers could not." Elias met her gaze. "Where I come from, you don't walk away from people who need help, even if they've been calling you names." Something passed between them in that moment, an unspoken acknowledgement. That night, as the court recovered and the alarms finally went silent, Queen Vareth visited his cell. She didn't enter, only stood in the doorway. "You are not what I thought," she said quietly. Then she left. Elias lay awake long after, wondering which of them she truly meant.
The fortress was quieter now. The fever had broken in most of the infected, and the court moved through the halls with a new kind of wary respect toward Elias. Guards still shadowed him, but their hands rested a little lighter on their weapons. For 3 days, Queen Vareth didn't summon him. He worked alone in the lab, translating data and tinkering with alien tech in silence. But on the 4th day, she came. This time, she dismissed the guards at the door and stepped inside alone. The room seemed smaller with her in it, her presence as heavy as gravity. "You have changed my people's fate," she said without preamble, "but you have also changed mine." Elias set down the tool in his hand. "That sounds like something someone says right before they thank you or execute you." Her lips curved slightly. Perhaps both. She moved closer, the faint metallic scent of her skin mingling with the ozone hum of the lab's machinery. "Your heart, I can hear it." Elias swallowed, but didn't look away. "And what's it telling you?" "That you are not afraid of me," she said softly. "That is unsettling." The moment stretched. Then, as if she'd let it go too far, she stepped back sharply. Her face smoothed into its usual mask. "I should not be here," she said, almost to herself. She turned toward the door. "Tomorrow I will have you brought to the strategy hall. There are matters you will assist me with." And then she was gone, leaving the air between them warmer than it should have been, and Elias wondering if the space they'd been standing in could still remember the sound of her voice. The next day, the strategy hall buzzed with tension. The room was a wide circular space with a holographic star map glowing at its center. Zala generals stood in tight clusters, their armor reflecting cold light, their voices low and clipped. Elias stood beside Queen Vareth at the head of the table. He had no formal place here, but she had ordered his presence, claiming his knowledge of human flight patterns might prove useful in a new campaign. He listened more than he spoke until he noticed something strange. One of the generals, a tall male with emerald-scaled skin, kept glancing toward Vareth's back whenever she turned away.
His fingers tapped against the hilt of his ceremonial blade, not nervous tapping, but counting, timing. Elias had seen that kind of patience before, in bounty hunters and assassins. The meeting ended without incident, but as they walked the corridor outside, Elias caught a glint of movement in the reflection of a polished wall panel. "Down!" he barked, and shoved Vareth aside, just as a narrow blade sliced the air where her spine had been. The attack was fast. 2 assailants, one with a blade, the other with a concealed energy pistol. Elias's hands moved without thinking. He slammed the blade wielder into the wall, feeling the shock reverberate up his arm, then spun toward the gunman. Vareth was already moving, her golden eyes blazing. Her clawed gauntlet struck the gun from her attacker's hand, sending it skittering across the floor. In seconds, both men were disarmed and pinned. But the damage was done. They were her own men. Later, in the safety of the royal escape tunnels, narrow passages of stone and steel hidden beneath the fortress, Vareth stood with her back to Elias, her shoulders tense. "They were sworn to me," she said, her voice low. "I raised them to command, and they tried to kill me." "They weren't after you," Elias said, leaning against the wall. "They were after what you're becoming. You've been changing things here. That scares people." She turned to face him then, and for the first time since they'd met, she looked unshielded. "You risked yourself for me." He shrugged. "That's what humans do for people they care about." Her gaze softened at that word, care. She stepped closer, the dim light tracing the lines of her face. "You speak as though such a thing is common. In my world, it is rare, dangerous." Elias held her gaze. Worth it, though. The air between them felt heavier, charged with a tension that didn't feel threatening. Vareth's eyes flicked briefly to his mouth before she turned sharply away, pulling her cloak around her. "We must move," she said, her voice cool again, though not quite steady. "The tunnels are not safe for long." But as they walked side by side into the dark, the echo of that moment followed them, silent proof that their fates had begun to weave together in ways neither could undo. They didn't stay in the tunnels for long. Vareth led Elias through a winding series of narrow corridors until they reached a sealed chamber deep beneath the fortress. Here, the walls shimmered faintly, absorbing sound and light, an ancient royal refuge. For days they remained hidden while her loyalists secured the palace above. They spoke little at first, the silence thick with unspoken questions. But gradually, their words returned, soft and unguarded in the quiet shelter. It was on the 5th day that Vareth summoned him with a single word. "Elias?" She stood near the central pillar of the chamber, her posture straight, but her hands clasped tightly before her. The golden glow of her eyes was dimmer than usual, and something in her expression told him this wasn't about politics or war. "I have news," she began, the pause between each word unusually long. "It concerns both of us." Elias felt his stomach tighten. "All right, tell me." Her gaze didn't waver. "I am with child." The words hit him like a sudden drop in gravity. He blinked, certain he'd misheard. "That's not possible. Our species are not compatible," she finished. "Yes, I know, and yet the tests are clear." Elias ran his hand through his hair, pacing in a tight circle. "We haven't—" He stopped himself, remembering moments in the past weeks, her hand on his during the fever crisis, the lingering touches when they exchanged tools, and the strange way Jala's biochemistry sometimes interacted through skin contact. She stepped closer, her voice steady now. Our peoples would see this as an abomination. My council would demand its removal, but I do not wish that." Elias looked up sharply. "You want to keep it?" Vreth's jaw tightened. "This child is proof of something greater than our laws. It is impossible, yet it exists. Like the thought of you and I standing here together, like you defying me in my own court and living." There was no triumph in her voice now, only a strange, fierce protectiveness. Elias searched her face, trying to read every flicker of emotion. He saw fear, yes, but also something warmer, something she might not yet have the courage to name. "You realize," he said quietly, "this could put a target on both of us, on all of us." "I do, and still I will protect it, and you." It was the first time she had said that last word without mockery or formality. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The chamber seemed to hold its breath around them. Then, without thinking, Elias reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. In that touch, the reality settled in. Not just the life growing against all odds, but the truth that they were no longer two separate fates. Whatever came next, they would face it together.
The news did not stay secret for long. Whether it was a careless whisper from a healer or a deliberate leak from the palace, Elias never knew. But within a day, the corridors above the refuge trembled with the sound of unrest. Vareth returned from a council meeting with her face carved in stone. "They know," she said simply. Elias stood from the bench where he'd been working on a comms device. "And?" "They call the child an abomination," she said, each word heavy with controlled fury. "They demand its removal and your execution." He didn't ask what her answer had been. He could see it in her eyes. That night, the fortress shook with the thunder of conflict. Loyalists clashed with rebels in the grand halls. The air in the refuge trembled with distant weapons fire. Vareth paced, her cloak brushing the floor. "We cannot stay. If they breach the lower levels, we will be trapped." "You're not safe here anymore. Neither of us is." Within the hour, they moved, slipping through maintenance shafts, guided by one of Vareth's most trusted guards. The air grew colder as they descended toward the old hangars buried in the rock beneath the palace. But even loyalty had its limits. Halfway through the tunnels, the guard stopped, his crest flattened against his skull. "They are coming," he whispered. "A full hunting unit, minutes away." Elias felt the pulse in his throat quicken. "Then we don't have minutes." They ran. The tunnels echoed with the rhythmic pound of boots behind them, the harsh shouts of soldiers closing in. At one turn, an energy blast scorched the wall inches from Vareth's head. Elias grabbed her arm and yanked her into a side passage, both of them breathless in the thin, recycled air. When they burst into the hangar, it was almost empty. Only a handful of old starcraft sat gathering dust. Elias sprinted toward the smallest one, a sleek but battered courier vessel. "You can fly this?" Vareth asked, striding after him. "If it still breathes, I can fly it," Elias said, fingers flying over the controls. The ship's systems groaned awake, lights flickering. The hangar doors were sealed. Rebels were pouring into the space behind them. Vareth stepped forward, planting herself between Elias and the incoming fire. Energy bolts lit the air around her as she fought with a precision that was almost beautiful until the final door lock gave way and the hangar roof split open to the night sky. Elias shouted, "Now!" She leapt aboard, and the ship roared upward, streaking into the darkness above Zala Prime. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Stars streaked past, and only then did Elias glance at her. She was staring forward, jaw set, one hand unconsciously resting over her abdomen. Whatever was chasing them now wasn't just the Dominion. It was the entire weight of two civilizations. The courier vessel slipped beyond the Dominion's borders in less than a day, its engines strained to their limits. Elias had plotted a course to the farthest point he knew, a cluster of uninhabited moons on the edge of the old trade routes. It was a place too remote for war and too insignificant for pursuit. When they finally landed, the ship's hull still warm from atmospheric entry, the silence was startling. No alarms, no footsteps, just the wind across pale sands and the glint of 3 suns hanging low in the sky. They built their shelter from the ship's spare panels and the natural caves in the cliffside. Days passed quietly. Elias hunted small desert creatures for food, while Vareth adapted the ship's filtration system to draw water from the planet's sparse air. In the evenings, they would sit outside and watch the twin shadows stretch across the horizon. Sometimes they spoke of their old worlds, sometimes of nothing at all. But slowly, the taut caution in their words softened into something warmer. One night, under a sky crowded with stars, Elias caught her watching him, not with the sharp assessment of a queen weighing an opponent, but with something gentler. "You miss it," she said quietly, "your world." "Every day," he admitted, "but if I'd gone back, I'd have never met you." She didn't answer, but her hand found his, and for the first time, she didn't pull away. Weeks later, the child came into the world, not with the clinical precision of the Dominion's birthing chambers, but in the humble warmth of their cave. Elias held the small, wriggling form against his chest, awestruck. The child's skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, a mix of human softness and jaza sheen. Its eyes opened, golden like Vareth's, but flecked with human green. "She is strong," Vareth said softly, her voice carrying both pride and awe. Elias smiled. "She's impossible, just like us." They both knew their safety was fragile. Somewhere in the Dominion, rumors were already growing, stories of a vanished queen, a human defector, and a child who could unite or destroy two peoples. And yet, in their hidden refuge, the weight of that destiny felt far away. Here there was only the soft breathing of their daughter, the steady hum of the stars beyond, and the knowledge that against all odds they had built something neither empire nor law had ever imagined. One evening, as they stood outside their cave, the twin moons rising, Vareth's gaze followed the constellations she had once navigated as a ruler. "They will come for us one day," she said. "I know, but when they do, we'll be ready, together." Her fingers tightened around his. For the first time since the throne room, her smirk returned, not mocking now, but quietly certain. The towering queen who had once laughed at the idea of loving a human now stood beside one, their child in her arms, staring at a universe that no longer felt divided.